Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Barry Erickson, and I'm Community Engagement Coordinator here at Wheaton Public Library. We are delighted tonight to bring you this program on cultivating native plants in small spaces. Amy Phillips is the DuPage County Program Director for the Conservation Foundation. After working as an architect and sustainability consultant for many years, she made the leap to lend her talents toward conservation programming. Amy focuses her work in DuPage County and manages several programs, including River Sweep, Adopt a Stream, and the DuPage Nature RX Coalition. She's a builder of networks, facilitator of teams, program developer, and has a strong track record of connecting people to nature in ways that are meaningful to them. Amy has advanced degrees in biomimicry, business administration, and architecture. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Amy.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. Excited to talk about one of the favorite part of my job, actually. I get to go walk around and talk to people about plants and their landscapes and try to make everything more beautiful. So as Barry mentioned, I work with the Conservation Foundation. We are located in South Naperville, so not too far away from you. We were started actually in Wheaton over 50 years ago. Our mission is to improve the health of our communities, and we do that by protecting and preserving open space and rivers and building and growing healthy communities. You can see our service territory. We're here in Northeast Illinois. We are member supported, and we're thrilled to be a part of your community. My name is Amy. As Barry mentioned in my bio, I started out as an architect, so I do have a design background. So a lot of what I'll talk about, definitely some plants, but also some tips and tricks for how to design how to make a space that is going to bring you joy. You see pictures of my yard. I am a hobbyist when it comes to what I do with my yard. I always like to think of my yard as my test ground where I try out different things that sometimes are successful and sometimes aren't. And so you can always learn from my mistakes. Those of you that have not been down to the McDonald Farm in South Naperville, highly encourage you to do so. We have demonstration gardens, all different kinds of native gardens. We've got different kinds of solar energy. We have a working organic farm. And as folks that work in conservation, we really do appreciate the land and the ethic and carrying on, the Native American heritage that, they did not choose to leave this land, of course, but we are working on to carry on that legacy that is inherent in their culture and customs. So back to thinking about the history, a lot of you have heard that Illinois is the prairie state, but only 0.01% of the original prairie remains today. Those remnant prairies are very precious, and people will always work to try to preserve as many of those as they possibly can. But as I said, the Conservation Foundation, we've been working in Northeast Illinois for over 50 years to protect and preserve open space, primarily with forest preserves and park districts. So those public lands are really, really, really important. But 97% of the state of Illinois is privately owned. And so what we did was we came up with 20 years ago, an awesome guy named Jim came up with this idea of conservation at home and conservation at work. And so really starting to work with private landowners to understand what is sustainable landscaping and how can native plants be used for benefit. And how would they even start to do that? You see the QR code on the right. You can learn more about that program. And then Barry's going to put some links. If you're not so interested in QR codes, she will put those links in the chat as well. But we like to think of it as an accessible land certification. Rewards progress, not perfection. We're looking for bringing in native plants and wildlife habitat. We're looking for holding water on site. That is really, really important. Part of this program is supported by DuPage County Stormwater Management. And because we know that the more water we can hold on the site on rainy, stormy nights like tonight, the less get flushed into our neighbors, into their basements or into the rivers and cause flooding. So holding water on site is really important, as well as earth-friendly landscaping practices and different ways of having some native plants. The red dots on that map, that is a map of Northeast Illinois. The red dots are the Conservation Foundation, which is us, but we have lots of partners that work all over this area on this program. So no matter where you're located in Northeast Illinois, we will probably be able to get somebody out to see you. I thought it might be kind of fun I do a lot of these yard visits in the season. So to think about what it would be like if I were to come to your yard, right? So, think about your space. Maybe it's a balcony, maybe it's acres and acres, maybe it's a small urban plot. What is the space that you are currently living at that you would like to think about attracting some wildlife to, or some native plants, or having it just be beautiful? And what would bring you joy? Usually, whenever I show up, I've got our checklist, I've got our Bringing Nature to Your Yard guide, and we just sort of walk around and we give some ideas. We have conversations. Sometimes there's this wet area and I don't know what to do with it. Or I can't get anything to grow underneath this tree. Or what do I do? I can't, everything is just so hot, it's so dry, my soil's bad. There's lots of questions that people have, and we try to answer that. So you can go ahead and scan that QR code, and Barry also will put the link in the chat. But how this works is we'll come out to your house for free. We'll have a conversation. It usually takes about an hour. And if you meet the criteria, we could certify you right on that spot. We'll give you the sign and everything. And if not, we'll give you some suggestions, and you can always call us back. So let's think about this as a yard visit. This was my house when I first moved in, and my house now, actually 3 years ago. It's even more different now. I always like to say my yard was certified 10 years ago, and I had barely as anywhere near as much as I do now. My mother lovingly says that I have a claustrophobic amount of plants, and I say yes, I do. And that's just my aesthetic. Not everybody likes to have all of those plants like I do. And we'll talk about different kinds of designs that you could think about. But, a lot of times one of the questions that people usually will always say, oh, so I want to get rid of my grass. That's one of the first things that I hear. And, you could see by the drawing or the picture that I had earlier, you don't have to get rid of all of your grass, but you can just rethink what your grass is. Instead of it being an area rug, think about it, or instead of it being wall-to-wall carpeting, think of it like an area rug, right? It's a nice palette cleanser to offset and really highlight the beauty of the plants and the landscaping that you have. Too much grass, there is no biodiversity. The roots are only 2 inches deep, so it doesn't hold very much water. Most of it just sheets right off, goes into the streets, gets into the rivers, and causes flooding. So the more native plants, and the more landscaping you have, the more your landscaping has the ability to absorb that water, as well as attract wildlife. And so we're not always saying you need to get rid of all of your lawn, but think about reducing it, and then thinking about, the more and more talking to your neighbors, and the more people that do it, the better off they'll be. Because really our goal is to make that landscape functional. There is a role for turf grass and trees, right? Kids need soccer fields and things like that. But if that's all your landscape is, it is biologically inert. It's not supporting any wildlife. It's not helping nature. It's not building a healthy community in any way. Whereas if you have what's on the right, you've got those native plants, they're going to hold that water. They're going to attract that wildlife. It's going to need a lot less chemicals to maintain it, less fertilizers and pesticides and things like that. So if our goal is to attract wildlife and our goal is to have a sustainable landscape, one of the main components is this native plant. And so what is a native plant? And the thing to think about is that these are the plants that have co-evolved with our native wildlife since the glaciers retreated. So over 12,000 years, they're testing and tracking and everything else. These wildlife and these plants have evolved together because these native plants are the foundation of the food system. So when we say native plant, we're talking about something that is naturally found here versus a non-native or introduced species. So why are native plants beneficial? What do they do? I'm sure all of you have had instances where you've tried to grow grass and it's too shady or it's too wet, and not all grass just doesn't like to live in certain locations. And so having having a diversity of options that like to live either hot or wet or dry or shade, those plants can grow in a lot of different locations. Over time, they are less costly and time consuming because they will sustain themselves. They come back every year. They're perennial. And a lot of times when you have the ground covers, they can reduce that weed pressure. But just like with every baby, you got to take care of your babies. Those first couple years, you've got to take care of them. You've got to weed them. You've got to make sure that they aren't taken over, especially by some of the more invasive species. They will use rainwater effectively. You can put certain wet-loving plants at the bottom of your downspouts and things like that, or in wet areas, and they're going to absorb it. And again, as I said, they are the foundation for the food chain. These five species, or these five families of plant, support 75% of the insects in our area. And if I'm going to highlight one, I'm going to highlight the oak trees because I think there's something like 50% of our urban canopy is maple tree at this point. A lot of that has to do with the trees, the species that we've lost due to pests, like the ash tree and the emerald ash borer. So, but now that most of our tree canopy is maples, what do we do if, a pest comes and starts to feed on the maples? So having not only a diversity of different kinds of tree species, but oaks are really, really vitally important. They are a keystone species. One plant or one oak tree can support 400 different kinds of wildlife. So oaks, oaks. Another one that everyone really likes to talk about is the milkweed. That is the host plant for the monarch butterfly, really critically endangered, critically important species, as well as all of the goldenrods and the asters and the black-eyed Susan. So these five species are ones. And so why are we talking about native plants? I talked about flooding earlier. If you see on the left, you'll see some of the non-native introduced species or cultivated versions. So hydrangeas, daylilies, things like that. And then you can see how deep those roots are, as well as how deep the roots of the turf grass is. So that's why whenever you get these large flooding events or even just a mild rain, that the water is not going to be held on site. Whereas with the native plants, these roots are 4, 6, sometimes even 10, 12, 14 feet deep, depending on the species. And what that's doing is it's breaking up that clay soil. It's creating those channels that allow for that water to infiltrate deeper and deeper into the ground, as well as through freeze thaw, it sort of breaks up that clay and builds that wonderful topsoil that is now where we grow our food in this area. One of the main questions I get whenever I start at somebody's on a yard visit is, what's a native versus what's invasive versus what's non-native. And I like to think of this in terms of a gradient. So a lot of us have boxwoods, we have yews, we have hydrangeas, we have lilacs. All of those plants they're not native, but they're either neutral. So we kind of like to think of hostas like it's kind of like iceberg lettuce. Your bunnies and your deer will definitely eat them and they will get some nutrients, but they're not getting a lot of nutrients out of it. So having more nutrient-rich food is always important for if you're trying to support wildlife. And also lilacs and the sedums, those are not native, they are introduced, but they attract all sorts of different pollinators. So they actually are very beneficial. And then on the other end, you've got your invasives. So that is mostly your honeysuckles, your buckthorns, more recently your Callery pears, Bradford pears, which are now going to be no longer able to be sold here. Burning bush, vinca, all of these are species that are invasive. And what we say when invasive, it's likely to cause economic or environmental harm because it escapes into wild areas, shades out the new growth for the new oaks and hickories and the really important trees so that it doesn't hurt the existing canopy trees, but there is no next generation because these plants are shading them out and they're overpowering their ability to reproduce. So we're always talking about invasive plants, trying to get those out of your yard as quickly as you can, and then try to encourage more native plants. But that's not to say that, you have to remove everything from your yard in order to be certified. Far from it. One of the questions I always get is about cultivars or nativars. What are cultivars? What do we do with those? So are they good or bad? And the answer, as with most things, is it depends. So cultivars have been genetically modified For some reason. So some of them are sterile, provide no nutrition, or even toxic. Some of them offer just as much benefit. So there's a lot of research that's going on. But when it comes to your yard, it's not necessarily that cultivars are a problem. If you have peonies that were your grandmother's and you transplanted them, amazing. Keep your peonies, enjoy them. But then also think of that's not necessarily a cultivar, that's an introduced. But if you've got a certain plant that you have an emotional attachment to and you really love it, amazing. Don't get rid of your cultivars, but it's the absence of natives that is the problem. So always consider just adding a straight native to the mix as well. Um, and then, so there's the cultivar and native-var. It's not really important what the distinction is, but a lot of times people will say, "Oh, well, it's a native, it's a cultivated version of a native plant." And when they do that, when they selectively breed it and genetically modify it, they're selecting for certain traits. So sometimes it's a brighter color, sometimes it's shorter instead of taller, sometimes it's disease resistant. And all of those different kinds of modifications that we are making to the genetic stock of these plants, um, it can be sometimes it's fine. Like if you're making something shorter or you're making it disease resistant, for the most part, it's still going to attract the pollinators. But when you're changing the color, the image that you see on the side, this is what a yellow coneflower, black-eyed Susan looks like to us, but pollinators see an ultraviolet light. We don't. So in ultraviolet light, that's the purple image you see on the right. And you can see it looks very, very different. It's got that bullseye. So it literally is, the plant is literally telling the pollinator, here's where the pollen is, here's where your food is. And when you selectively change the color of something, you're sometimes selectively changing out that signal that is telling the pollinator where to find its food. So that's why they can be good, they can be bad, but again, it's not necessarily that it's a problem. It's just that you need to ideally also have some native plants in the mix. So when we're talking about in the mix and talking about aesthetics, there's two types that we tend to think about. We tend to think about the more native and neat. So having native plants, but within a very traditional looking landscape, and then all the way to like the butterfly gardens and the more wild and free. I always have ambitions that my yard is going to look like the picture on the left, but the reality is I have a hard time saying goodbye to some, and then they decide to go somewhere else, and I don't necessarily get rid of them. And so my ambitions don't always match up with the reality of what I'm willing to do. So, as far as tips and tricks, one of the simplest things you can do is just to swap out some of your existing plants with your natives. I got rid of a lot of my daylilies and swapped them out with, oh goodness, all sorts of stuff. But butterfly weed is a really great one. It's just about the same size, only it is a type of milkweed. And so it is the host plant for the monarch butterfly. It is just, and it does actually just love bad soil. So it is actually a fairly robust plant in that sense. They always say to plant it maybe next to a driveway or a sidewalk or some sort of rocky kind of clay soil that's really dry and has a lot of sun. The butterfly weed is going to be super happy there. Blazing stars, the liatris, those are just gorgeous plants. They are also bunny candy. And so if you do plant things that you think that the bunnies are going to eat too much of, some of your strategies are to just, instead of having one plant, have 5 plants and then protect those plants. There's something called a bunny fence that I highly recommend. It's just like a little 2 foot by 2 foot metal fence. You can buy them at any garden store. You can buy them online, anywhere you want. But then you just sort of you build a tiny little fence around that one plant that you're trying to save, so that instead of eating the main stem, it just maybe the bunny might eat a couple of the leaves, and that's totally fine because you're protecting the plant itself. So lots and lots of different plants that are just conventionally very easy to swap out for existing landscape plants. So that's always a great way to start, especially if you're brand new to something and you don't really know much about it. Just go get a bigger plant from the plant store, dig up the other one, give it to a neighbor, and try something new. Another thing to think about are the layers of your landscape. A lot of times, whenever I'm going on sites, there's some people, they just love flowers. And so there's all these different kind of flowers, but they haven't really thought about grasses. They haven't thought about ground covers. They haven't thought about understory trees and shrubs. What are the things? So thinking about, from multiple layers, because all of these different layers will allow you to attract multiple different kinds of wildlife. So the birds and the squirrels, and then all the way down to different kinds of birds that are ground nesting birds. So what are some of those layers? I will again reiterate my love of oak trees and highly encourage you to plant oaks. There's oaks that like wet environments, oaks that like dry environments, everything in between. I actually swapped out my Bradford pear for a chinkapin oak. It's a bigger tree, so I had to put it further away from my house. But I'm thrilled with the acorns and the jays and the squirrels that all come to eat those acorns. So canopy trees are really big. They're obviously sun loving because they're 60 to 80 feet tall. Then you've got understory trees and shrubs, which actually tend to be more part sun. So these are the ones that you can put a little bit closer to your house on the corners, for example. These red buds and serviceberries are conventional plants. You can buy them at any plant store. Red buds on the left have these really bright pink flowers first thing in the spring, totally gorgeous. Serviceberries have edible berries that taste like sweet, sweet, sweet blueberries. The only time I've ever been able to taste one was 2 years ago when the cicadas were making the birds so full they couldn't actually eat all of the service berries. So I was actually able to try one at that point. So, and a lot of these understory trees and shrubs, they all have edible property. Not all, definitely not all. Some of them have edible properties that you can either make sausage or like syrups out of. A lot of them have antioxidant and disease fighting different properties. So you can go down a rabbit hole when it comes to a lot of these shrubs, but they're really great for screening. And they're really just great for attracting those birds and caterpillars. Oops. Okay. And then when we get to that bottom layer, that herbaceous layer, that's your flowers, that's your grasses, that's your ground covers. And that's when you really have to have spent some time on the site. How much sun does it actually get? When we say full sun, we're talking at least 6 hours. And usually these plants like that kind of hot afternoon sun. So the morning sun is a little bit more gentle. But a lot of times for these plants that like the full sun, in order to get the flowers and the seeds, they need a lot of sun. So making sure that you put the plants in the location where they're going to be happy. So you can see on the far left, the orange, the butterfly milkweed, the blazing star that I've already mentioned, purple cone flowers, amazing plants. Pretty much anybody, even if you don't have a native landscape, people love purple cone flowers. The bunnies can like them a lot, so especially when they're young, making sure that you're protecting them with the little bunny fence, or just making sure that you have a lot of them. Whenever you plant like one plant or two plants, it's like a little snack for a rabbit. I've got more black-eyed Susans. I'll show you pictures later on. I got more black-eyed Susans that I never know what to do with. So if the bunnies want to come eat some black-eyed Susans, amazing. I've got more than they could ever possibly eat. And then there's also shade. So the full sun plants tend to be more of your prairie plants. The shade plants tend to be more of your woodland plants. So those are going to be the ones that evolved underneath the trees. So they're going to like less than 3 hours of shade, but it's also that dappled shade. So think about you sitting underneath a tree in the summer and how the light kind of moves around based on the wind in the trees. That is what's dappled shade. That is what is going to be the best habitat for these shade plants. Um, the one area of a house that is always going to be the hardest part to hit is the very north side of the house right up against it, because it is not that dappled shade. There's no sunlight that ever reaches it. And it's a very hard place to grow a plant. There are some that will tolerate it, but it's a very challenging spot. But a lot of this herbaceous shade, some of these are ground covers, which, as I mentioned earlier, is really about reducing weed pressure. So I've put these kind of plants in my parkways underneath the shade, underneath a parkway tree, because instead of just trying to mow grass up to a tree, not fun, nobody wants to do it. You just pull the grass back, you put some mulch in there, and then you just get some ground covers. And then you have these little pops of the geraniums and the phlox and the columbine. They have different leaf textures and they just give those pops of color throughout the year. Um, More dry, so the sun and the dry, they tend to go hand in hand unless if it's a wetland. So think about these would be like your prairie plants. So these would be ones that are used to the really bad clay soil that we have. Some of them actively do not want to be in rich soil. The butterfly milkweed will not tolerate rich soil. prairie smoke and little blue stem will not tolerate irrigation. I've tried it. If you, as soon as you run the the sprinklers on it, they will go away because they need that very, very dry soil. So they are adapted to these very, very harsh conditions. I can't say enough love, give enough love to prairie drop seed. If you guys at all have edge conditions, they're just a great little plant. It stays where you put it, and it's salt tolerant, so you can put it up against like driveways and sidewalks and things like that. And then black-eyed Susans, as I mentioned, very hardy. I will show you pictures. And then there's then there's the wet soil. So this would be more of your wetland plants. So not necessarily plants that live in the water like a pond, but plants that live on the side of a pond. So they like to have that consistently wet or well-drained soil, but they still like the full sun. So if you're thinking about rain gardens, these are your plants. And but I would say blue flag iris, you can grow that. It's a pretty adaptable plant. I have that in areas, and I don't have wet area at all. And lobelia is an amazing plant. So all of these plants are great, and there's many, many more other than that. Another tip or trip to think about is seasonal blooming. So sometimes, especially when we're first getting started, we'll go buy whatever's in flower at the plant store right now. So if that's in the spring, you're going to have a lot of spring blooms, and then you may not have any flowers later on throughout the season, which is kind of, not ideal. And or if you're in the late, you say it's in the middle of summer and everything is in bloom and you have all of these prairie plants, but then you realize in the spring you didn't have anything for that in the spring. So thinking about this is a resource, you can use the QR code for that, but this is a resource to look at what are the plants that bloom at different times. I will say July, we're coming up on July. That is just prime season for all the beautiful prairie flowers. So get ready for quite a display, especially with all of the rain that we've had. But thinking through all the way from early spring, all in spring ephemerals like bluebells, all the way to getting some asters in the ground so that you have those flowers even into September and October. Another thing to also consider is what is the habit of this plant? Most of the time on plant tags, it'll say that it's a spreading or it'll say it's a clumping. If not, you can look it up. But when we say spreading, we're talking more the ground covers. So Pennsylvania sedge, Penn sedge, you'll hear people, or Carex Pennsylvania, people say a lot of different ways, but Penn sedge is it's one that I'm experimenting with right now, and it grows great underneath trees. It likes it dry and it likes it shady. And so it does really well in that environment. And then if you put that and say, then but it does spread. So it will spread by roots and eventually it'll start to spread into your grass. And maybe you think that's a great idea, or maybe you just want to mow it over. Both are options. The plant doesn't ever get above like 10 inches, 10 inches tall. And you can once it's established, you can mow it over like it's just turf grass, only maybe once or twice a year. Wild ginger is another great one that likes it a little shady and wet. So understanding the wet versus the dry. Clumping is really great for different kinds of aesthetics. So a lot of times the clumping ones might be that pop of color. So you have the ground cover and then you have that pop of color. And but understanding that they're not going to spread. They're going to stay where you put them. I always like to highlight what we call the 3-5-7 rule in this, because 3-5-7, it gets to that idea that you want to not just plant one plant. You want to plant multiples of the same plant, and you want to plant them in groups. And the reason why you do that is because you want to make sure that when they come up in the spring, if all of the plants in that area look the same except for one or two, then you know that it's like the friend, not friend. You pull out the ones that, especially when you're first getting started, you may not know what the plant looks like in the spring. So pulling out the weeds, it's easier when you have multiples of the same plant in the same location. And we say odd numbers because if you have even numbers, your brain wants to make symmetry. And if it doesn't find the symmetry, something looks off and we don't think it looks right. And so by planting plants in odd numbers, it kind of tricks your brain into thinking or to not trying to find that symmetry. So it looks better. And then, of course, colors and textures. I've talked about prairie dropseed, and side oats grama is another one. I mean, grasses are something that I don't have enough of also. I'm experimenting with different kinds of sedges and grasses right now just because I want to see what it looks like. But they're kind of the unsung heroes. They live a really long time. They help to reduce that weed pressure. it's different kinds of habitat. I mean, I've heard ratios of 80% grass and 20% flowers, and I'm nowhere near that. And I'm sure most of you are not also, but I'm trying to get to that, having more of the grasses because they are so, so important. And not just for the biodiversity, but also for the aesthetics. They allow your eye to rest and then really allow those colors of the flowers to pop. Sometimes you run out of places to plant, like I have. So I started planting in my parkways. So I live in Naperville. We have really wide parkways here. Um, Lots of trees. So, you can plant them underneath the street trees. You can put shade plants under street trees or underneath mailboxes. If you have like a taller grass, like a big blue stem, if it's in the sun, and then, two different colors of flowers or something, you can just have these nice little groupings around your mailbox. You do want to, I'll talk about salt tolerant in just a second, but you do want to check with your municipality. Sometimes they have restrictions on that. And just a good rule of thumb is just to make sure that they're low. You don't want to provide a visual obstruction for people driving. So just a general rule of thumb is any plant that is not going to get taller than 30 inches. And they do need to be salt tolerant. Some of our native plants are very, I don't want to say fragile, but they don't tolerate salt at all. And so you don't want to plant those in that location because even if you're reducing how much salt you put on your sidewalk and driveway, which we really hope you do, you can't control what the city does. And when they spray a lot of salt and then the plows put the salt in, the snow that's got the salt in it onto the land, all of that salt can get into your land. So you want to make sure that you plant the plants that are going to tolerate it well. And the U of I Extension has a really great list of that as well. And then also sometimes you just don't have room for it, or maybe like up until we lost a backyard tree earlier this year, but before that happened, it was just an enormous tree, and the only place that I could grow anything is in a pot. So I had a bunch of pots on my patio, and so there's a person at the Chicago Botanic Garden that is testing out all of these different ones, and you can always test them out yourselves. So I think these are the ones that will actually, I should check, but I think these are the ones that will stay in the pots and they will come back in the following year. A lot of times when I'm planting native plants in pots, I will put them in the ground over the winter because I'm not 100% sure that the pots can be very thin. Depending on the kind of pot, you might have to insulate around. There's all sorts of things that go into it. But, there are opportunities to experiment and play with different things in pots. So just as a recap for some of these rules of thumbs or tips and tricks, keeping that plant palette simple, as I mentioned, having a few types, a lot of the same plant. So planting them in groupings and just keeping that plant palette simple, especially when you're first starting out, because when they come up in the spring, you want to know what it looks like. You don't want to be surprised that all of a sudden there's this 7 foot tall weed that you thought was a plant that you planted. We talked about odd numbers. Focal points is really important. Think about like what your eye is going to see first and then what it's going to see second and third. What do you want it to focus on? Ground covers are great for reducing weed pressure. It also eventually will get rid of your need to constantly be putting mulch down, which should make a lot of people happy. Especially when you're talking about small spaces, shorter is definitely better than tall. There are amazing tall native plants that have no basis or no business being in a small area. So when in doubt, get a shorter plant and use those plants that will grow in a variety of different conditions. Sometimes when I walk around, I'm talking to folks and they've got a lot of work. Either they've got a lot of invasive species or maybe they just moved in and they have just a blank land. And it's overwhelming to think about starting completely from scratch, right? And so usually I say start with what brings you joy. These are the areas of my yard that bring me joy. We did the pollinator plot in the parkway. That was 10 years ago when my kids were really little. We just got some friends together. I bought some plants and we put them in the ground. It was part of a pollinator project I was working on at the time. But now every time I go there, I think about this time that I had with my friends and their children. And it's grown. The picture on the bottom right was before we lost our parkway tree in the this last storm. It's been a rough year for trees in Naperville. But you can see that it was way too many black-eyed Susans, and that was because they were the ones that were able to tolerate the amount of shade that that tree was now casting 10 years later. So now every disturbance is an opportunity. Now I will be able to grow more sun-loving plants back in this area again because the tree is no longer there. But, now I have a lot of black-eyed Susan. And in the top right is my elderberry. It is a wild, I love that plant. It is wild. If you have wet areas that are partial, a lot of, sun, but also a little bit of shade, it will be very happy. Elderberry is one of those plants that people either love it or they hate it. I love it, and so I always show pictures of it because look at those big flowers. And then it gives me elderberries that I make syrup out of, and then I give it to my family to try to keep them healthier throughout the winter. So these are the things that bring me joy, but think about like where do you have your morning coffee? How do you walk in your house? What are the things where is the area that is going to bring you the most joy? And then build that first. Or if you're going to start all over and you're like, I want somebody to do this for me, we have a lot of resources on our website. So you can use the QR code or you can just go to our website. And the last 2 years we started a training program for small scale landscape professionals called Conservation at Home Professional. And what this does is it trains existing landscape designers and contractors to incorporate native plants into their yard, into their work. So the folks that have gone through the training should know enough about native plants to be able to incorporate some of that into there. But then there's all sorts of resources on that page. So take a look at that and it'll be a great resource for you. Also on our website is this group of I don't know what you would call it. It's basically just like a mood board. And and it was put together by Kane County Wild Ones. And it's just a great resource. And I have this in a binder and I walk around with it on yard visits because a lot of times I'll say the name of a plant, but if you don't know what that plant looks like, you don't know if you want it or not. And so if I say wild geranium and then they could see what a wild geranium looks like, a lot of times people have the cultivated version, which tends to be a little bit smaller and darker in color. But the wild geranium, but what's nice about these mood boards is all of the plants on that same sheet will all grow in that same condition. So they will like that kind of part shade area. Likewise, there's just a lot of different there's with grasses and the different kinds of goldenrods and different kinds of asters and milkweeds. All of these are just great visualizations, but there's one that I laugh at because it's got the black-eyed Susans and like I have every plant on that mood board because that is my yard. It's hot and it's dry. So take that out. I will also recommend this app. This is the app that I use. It's called Picture This. It is an AI based, so sometimes it will hallucinate and tell you something is something that it's absolutely not. So sometimes if in question, if you're not sure it's correct, just take another picture and it usually will confirm it. But it's a great one, especially, I know a lot of the native plants, but I don't begin to be able to understand all of the exotic and cultivated plants that are sold in garden stores over the last 30 years. So this is a great app and it also is really helpful if you're walking around your neighborhood or you're at the park district or a forest preserve. What is that? I want to have that plant. You can use this app to figure out what that plant is so that you can see where you can find it. So at the end of our yard visits, we kind of go through the checklist, and as I mentioned, it is rewarding progress, not perfection. We're looking for at least one item of these. There's four main categories. At least something that you've done to address all the four main categories. And so things like planting native plants, having native gardens, having those layers of landscaping, controlling invasive species is very, very important. I touched on that. I cannot emphasize how much it is important to get rid of honeysuckle and buckthorn, especially out of your yards. Things holding water on site. That's not always the easiest thing to do. There's ways to plant water-loving native plants like at where the downspout or, for example, your sump pump comes out. But you need to make sure that it's at least 5 foot minimum from your from your foundation just to protect your foundation. Some municipalities, I think unincorporated requires 10, so 10 feet. So, but there are ways to use that water as a resource. It is not, often we think of water as a nuisance and um, a waste product, but it's not. It is a life-giving resource, and you can take that water and you can direct it to hold that water on site and then put the right plants in to sort of absorb that. And then, of course, there's always rain barrels. We have rain barrels that we sell at various locations throughout the county in the spring, and then you can always come to the farm and get one on Thursday afternoons. We also talk about sustainable landscaping, so things like taking your leaves and putting them on your mulch beds, because what that will do is though that provides the habitat for so many pollinators and even fireflies. So if you're wanting to get more fireflies into your yard, having leaving those leaves on the mulch bed and then leaving them well into spring. I usually tell people around Mother's Day, trying to keep those, because that's by that time the larvae have emerged and they're able to, and they don't need the leaf litter anymore. But also things like not cutting down your tall flowers in the fall or even in early spring, leaving them up for as long as you can to provide seeds for the birds throughout the winter. But also that a lot of pollinators will lay their larvae and their eggs in the stems. And so when you cut those down and then throw them away, you're throwing away that next generation of pollinator. And then limiting fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, those kind of things. And then the fun stuff, the bird feeders, the bird houses, bird baths, even log piles and things like that to try to attract and hold the wildlife on site. For those of you that live in HOAs, if you're not familiar yet, Illinois last year passed an ordinance that homeowner HOA associations cannot prohibit residents from planting and growing Illinois native plants in their HOA, on their property. There are limitations. They don't want, and this should be anybody's limitation. You don't want to plant a really tall plant that could potentially fall into your neighbor's yard or like a public right of way, for example. But there is no limitation, even if you live in an HOA, that says that you cannot plant those native plants. And then there's another one that is it's not been out of committee yet, as far as I know. It's a House bill, Illinois Native Landscapes Act. So that is working to prohibit municipalities from fining residents if they have native gardens. That one is a little bit harder to do. I think they're working through some nuances on that, but those are two, knowing your rights, knowing what you can and cannot do. And before we get to questions, I just want to make another plug for the Conservation Foundation. Again, we are member supported. We've been around for over 50 years here in Northeast Illinois, started in Wheaton. So we'd love for you to become a member. When you join the Conservation Home Program, you automatically become a member of the Conservation Foundation, and we always love to see you at our events. So with that, I will leave you. How do you want to do this, Bari? Do you want me to? I want to leave this up for just a little bit because it's got contact information and it also has that QR code for scheduling a program, but I can take it down to however you want to handle the Q&A.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and leave that up since it has all of those great links on it as well as the QR code. And I'll read the questions out loud for you. Again, I may be generalizing things or skipping things that are super specific just because we have a lot of questions and a large audience here. Someone first, and I always go to the Q&A first. Someone's asking about the slides being shared. I think it would be such a huge file. I don't think we can share the slides, but remember that we did record this program and we are able to keep it up on our website. So you will be able to look at those things again. You can pause the video and get all the information that you need from the slides that way. Someone is asking specifically about the Gary Avenue project, but maybe we could extend this to generally if there's some kind of public land, is there a way to communicate with the local government to address any kind of conservation issues?
Conservation issues
Well,
as in what?
specifically for Gary Avenue, they're talking about that there's a really high curb, and so it's endangering the wildlife because they can't get over the high curb. But I'm just wondering if there are ways to talk to local governments to perhaps advocate for native plantings or other conservation efforts.
Sure. I mean, I'm always excited when citizens get involved in local government. And so, I mean, anything as simple as making a public statement at your city council or your village board. This is an issue that I've had. I really encourage native plants. A lot of times that will spark discussion. If there's specific instances, calling your local public works, they're usually very responsive to calling you back and they will answer whatever questions you have. Sometimes there are very legitimate reasons for why they can't have certain things, and a lot of times it has to do with traffic flow and things like that. And I'm not familiar with the Gary Avenue, although I think I'm going to write it down because I would like to know more about what's going on. But yeah, it just in general, call your city staff. They're really, really smart and educated, and they know what they're doing. Call city staff and ask them questions. And if you're not getting the answers, or if the policies are such that they won't allow certain things, then yeah, then it's time to go to the village board or the trustees and city council and make some public statements and send some emails, make some calls. Squeaky wheels.
Okay, thank you. Someone else is asking just about convincing other folks about the good qualities of insects rather than trying to keep insects from out of our yards.
Yeah, I mean, it really sometimes the fear of insects it's really comes down to fear. And one of the things that we do at the Conservation Foundation, one of the programs that I run is called Nature RX, and a lot of what we'll do is we don't bring insects so much, but like we will bring different native plant seeds and leaves and pine cones and things, and just having when people are very young, touching these things, interacting with these things so that they don't come from a place of fear where possible. As far as, I mean, there are certain insects. I work with an amazing educator that she cannot stand spiders. She just can't. And that's totally fine because, she's a nature educator. She's really, really amazing, really doesn't like spiders. And, I don't want spiders I actually like because they'll eat the other insects, but I always just think about it in terms of this is my habitat. My habitat is my house. If this animal or if this insect is coming into my house, well, I have a right to defend my house. But what I don't really, I feel personally, have a right to do is to go into their homes and hurt them in their homes. So when my kids were little, I was like, don't step on that. This is an animal, this is its home, have respect for it. So I think a lot of it is kind of working on respect and working on that empathy of this is its home. And I think sometimes we don't necessarily think of nature as being the place where this animal lives or where its home is. And so just thinking, having, cultivating that empathy and respect for all of life and but understanding it's okay to not want them in your house.
Okay, great, thank you. There have been a couple questions about where to buy native plants, and a couple people have made recommendations in the chat, but just wondering if you could give us a few more.
Absolutely. I have not seen the chat, so I don't know what's been stated. So I might, at the risk of restating, that website, the resources page that I mentioned, that QR code. Again, it's just in our website. Our website is lovely. It's just it's hard to navigate sometimes because there's so much stuff on it. But if you can find the resources page, that has a pretty extensive list of all of the native plant locations. I will say May and even early June is a great time for plant sales. There's plant sales all over the area. It's a little late for that at this point. So at this point, you're really looking at your local growers. Some of them depends on where you're at. I live in Naperville, so in Naperville and Aurora, we go to Growing Place. They have some too, but they've got a lot of non-natives, and then you have to be very specific about looking for the natives. Another plug for the Conservation Home Program. When you become a member of the foundation and join the Conservation Home Program, we like to think of it like a club. There's like a Facebook group so you can exchange with neighbors too, which is actually pretty fun when you see that kind of go down. But we can actually through that program, if you join the program, we can have access to wholesale distributors as well. So, and then Possibility Place Pizzo Nursery. I don't think Midwest is doing retail yet, but Possibility and Pizzo, they both are doing, they have opened up retail as well. So those are really great options. Possibility Place, it's in the south of us, and they tend to have more trees and shrubs. Pizzo tends to have more of the herbaceous. So I would say if you're willing to drive, check those out. They're great. And then if you're looking for wholesale access, then you can join the Conservation Home Program and we can help you with that.
Okay, thank you. There were also a couple questions about rabbits. Could you repeat some of your recommendations? I think you said there's some a fence, for example.
Yes. So there's the best thing you can do about rabbits is to have more plants. And that just because it's an all-you-can-eat buffet, eventually they're gonna get full. And so instead of having the most devastating rabbit damage I've seen is when people had maybe one or three of a plant and the rabbits just came and just ate them down to nubs. And it's just really sad because it was an investment in not only money, but energy and hope into something that you just saw destroyed. And so it can be very discouraging when you see that. So more plants and then just protect them, especially when they're young. That's what I said about the bunny fence. Bunny fences are everywhere. Garden stores sell them. I'm pretty sure they have them even at the big box stores. They sell them online. And what I do is like if I have, for example, the Liatris or that blazing star, it is bunny candy. I don't know what it is about that plant. The bunnies just want to eat it down to nothing. And so I basically put a triangle. So I put each of the bunny fence panels are like 2 foot by 2 foot. And so I make a triangle out of that. And then it is just around that one plant, or maybe a few more. But you don't want to have a big fence around it because then they're just going to jump over the fence because it's only 2 foot tall. Right? And actually, when by this time of year, you don't even see the bunny fences because the plants are much bigger than the fence at this point. So, but the key is to have it in a very small area. So around one plant or maybe three plants tops. And then eventually when the plant is older, then it's less tasty. The bunnies they want to eat the young, tender leaves. So whatever is new and fresh is what the bunnies are going for. Once it gets to be a little bit older, they're not interested unless they're very, very hungry. So bunny fences are great. Planting a lot of something is better so then if it eats a little bit of it, like I mentioned with my black-eyed Susans, eat as much of that as you want. I got so much black-eyed Susan, I don't even know what to do with it all of it, right? So, I don't bunny fence those at all. I really just take care of the Liatris, the Blazing Star, and then I put in some lobelia last year, and I saw that the bunnies were eating them because they were little. It's just because they were little. Now they're not touching them. But that year I had to put the bunny fence around it just to protect it. So, it's like what I said, when I go on these site visits, I'm like, you take care of your babies. When they're babies, you got to protect them. You got to weed them to make sure they don't get taken over. You got to make sure that they're watered because their roots are very small and they don't have access to the water that the mature plants would. And you got to make sure that the bunnies and the deer aren't going to get them. And then once they're established, they pretty much take care of themselves.
Okay, thank you. I know we're trying not to get into specific plants, but I know that you really want us to get rid of buckthorn. So can you tell some maybe safe and organic ways to get rid of buckthorn?
There are no safe and organic ways to get rid of buckthorn. Buckthorn and honeysuckle, they're just so, so pervasive. Like, so what I usually tell homeowners, and again, you talk to everybody, they'll have a different solution. You want to starve the roots. So whatever you do, cut it down to the ground. Like do not, and then it'll come back, and then you cut it down to the ground again, and then it'll come back and you cut it down to the ground again. Eventually the roots get starved and it will die if you do not want to use herbicide. Buckthorn and honeysuckle, if you want to get rid of it a lot faster, the best thing is to do a paint on herbicide. The ones that are commercially available, it's going to take multiple applications. A lot of times when you talk to like a restoration professional, they're out in acres, hundreds of acres, right? And so they're not going to go back to this particular place. So they use really, really high intensity herbicides. They paint them on the stump. So you cut it, and it's usually done in the fall because in the fall, the plants are no longer producing sugar through the leaves. They're bringing it down into the roots to survive the winter. And so if you are able to cut it and then do a fresh cut and then herbicide, like paint on herbicide on the stump, the roots will be drawing that down into the ground, and we'll have a better chance of killing a lot of the plant. Maybe not all of it, but a lot of it. But when we're talking about small spaces, if this is something you know is a problem, it's not, I don't have honeysuckle or buckthorn, but I've got mulberry, and it likes to pop up. And right now I'm just sort of in the starve the roots option where as soon as I see it, I cut it down. It comes back, I cut it down again. It comes back, I cut it down again. Eventually, I probably will do the herbicide route. I've just been trying to avoid it. But with some of these herbicide, especially if you want to get rid of it fast, that is probably your best option. The other option is to hire or rent a stump grinder. That also will help, but it's not 100%.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Can you
Oh,
tell
one
us?
more thing.
Oh,
Sorry. And this doesn't, the woody stuff, this won't work for. But a lot of people will have, excuse me, very pervasive, like herbaceous stuff. One of the things that will help for that, you want to try to dig it out as much as you can. But if you haven't heard of the cardboard method, that's another option where you have multiple layers of cardboard boxes. Take the tape and any sort of plastic off of it, put multiple layers of cardboard boxes, wet that down, and then cover it with mulch. And that's a weed barrier. So some of them are still going to get through it, but it's a great way to try to at least minimize the amount of the herbaceous weeds.
okay. Thank you. Um, I know you mentioned the rain barrels. Can you repeat the information about how to get rain barrels?
Yes, for time I actually cut that slide, so I apologize for doing that. But if you go to our website, if you go to our website, it's the Conservation Foundation. Well, you can see that .org, and then let's see, it's under Conservation at Home, and then one of the drop downs will be rain barrels, and so the rain barrels that we sell both throughout different municipalities throughout the spring as well as at the farm on Thursday afternoons throughout the year or throughout the summer. It's through a company called Upcycle. So they take import barrels, so like barrels that were imported olives and pickles and things like that. They buy those from the importers and then they repurpose them as rain barrels. It is literally reusing something. It's not even reducing and recycling. It is reusing a barrel. And it's just a great story. And they come in all sorts of different colors based on what was imported in them. So it's kind of cool that way. And yeah, so you can get those throughout at the McDonald Farm in South Naperville on Thursdays between 1 to 5. But you can also go to our website and pre-order if there's a specific color that you're looking for.
Okay, thank you. And again, I know we're kind of avoiding question about specific plants, but a couple people mentioned black walnut. Is there um, any pointers on black walnut trees?
I like black walnut. It's again kind of like my elderberry story. Some people hate elderberry, some people love it. Some people hate black walnut, some people love it. I think they're gorgeous trees. They are just phenomenal. Um, Two issues with the black walnuts. They have the walnuts will drop. So if it's too close to your house, you're going to hear walnuts dropping on your house throughout the summer, and that's not always fun. Or if you've got kids that are playing underneath that area, you might be concerned because they are, tennis ball size. They can be kind of big. And then the other issue with walnuts is it's like allele graph. There's a big word for it, but it basically means that they send out chemicals into the soil to try to deter other plants from growing around it. It has a substance called juglone. And buckthorn, interesting, will do the same thing. So, but what black walnuts are a native species, and they will do it. But because it's a native species, there's a lot of native plants that are perfectly fine living underneath the black walnut. Hydrangeas, chokeberries, spice bush. Those were the two that I put because my neighbor had a black walnut. So I did the research. You just have to write in juglone tolerant. I think it's Juglone. I could be wrong. But you just type in juglone tolerant plants. And I know that the native hydrangea, chokeberry, and spicebush, for example, I know that they are, but there's just a variety of juglone tolerant native plants because they co-evolved, right? So they have, the walnut developed a defense, and then the other plants were like, no, I got it. Don't worry about it. I'm going to still grow here. So, and the problem with the buckthorn is it's not from here, it's an introduced species. And so there are none of those millennium tested options for being able to still grow underneath something like that. That's why they will just take over.
Okay, I think most of our other questions are related to specific areas and specific plants. So we have all these great links to resources on your website as well as contact information that we will be that is here on this slide as well as we'll be sending out in our follow-up email. A couple people were asking about the slides, and again, this would be a huge slide deck to send out. So we will have the recording available permanently on the library's website, and you can just watch the presentation again, fast forward to the slides that you're interested in, pause it, and get the information that you need that way. If you are watching the recording of this program, you can contact me at ce@wheatonlibrary.org. Again, that's CE for community engagement at wheatonlibrary.org, and I'm happy to send the links, the direct links out to you. But other than that, I think that's really all we have time for, and all the more general questions for you, Amy. I don't know if you have any parting remarks that you'd like to add.
Sure, just for the very specific questions, just scan the QR code, have us come out. We're happy to come out and answer all your questions in person. So yeah, please join the Conservation Home program. It's a great program and it's one of my favorite parts of my job.
And actually, I did see one other thing in the chat. Someone is tuning in from further away in Wisconsin. If someone is outside of say DuPage County or so, the Chicagoland area, and they're looking for resources or places to get information about native plants, is there an easy way to do that? Do you have sister organizations?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say still go ahead and contact us. There are conservation home partners up in Wisconsin and into Indiana. I don't believe they're in Michigan, but I could be wrong about that. So the general area, there are partners all around. So even if none of the partners work out, still feel free to contact us, and we will try to put you in touch with people that would be able to help you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And again, this has been great, Amy. Thank you so much. And with that, I think we will say goodnight. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And go ahead and contact Conservation Home and get all those questions answered for your
Right.
specific
Thank you
site,
very
your
much.
specific plants. All right. Take care, everyone. Good night.